proceed with the third speaker, Markus Taube.
Yeah, welcome everybody. No Q&A for the other presentations. I've seen there had been something in the chat for Oscar, but Helmut Wagner, you are the chief here. You organize the whole thing. But okay, we can have the Q&A afterwards, huh?
You have 20 minutes and that's it.
Okay.
You have slides?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Oh gosh. Okay, so here we go. So thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to introduce some ideas here. There's already been some really super interesting and inspiring input today and yesterday, and I was wondering how to connect my contribution. But perhaps let's put it this way. I mean, I would like to talk a little bit on populism on the world stage and the way the Chinese elites are promoting their case in a global setting. And I mean, it's a fascinating thing how the Communist Party, as the Chinese elite, is playing this populist card, and it's playing it very well, I think, in the domestic arena as well as on the global stage. You might have seen that yesterday, Ms. von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, has made a seminal speech on the relationship between Europe and China in the coming years, which was very clear in the tone. While asking for dialogue and exchange, it was very clear in setting out the confrontational setup we have seen, and very clear in pushing China back in its support of Russia in the war in Ukraine. But we may also go back and connect the whole thing with China's reaction to the Trump agenda. Trump was pushing China back, trying to push China back from the global economic system, introducing a new type of protectionist America First policy, which was clearly directed against China. And well, he started something like a populist retreat of the United States from the global economy, and especially from East Asia. And China was the Chinese elite, the Communist Party was taking some years in its response how to deal with that. And on first sight, it looks as if China was going the same way, retreating from the global system. Talking about decoupling, talking about dual circulation, which is in principle an import substitution strategy. But I think if we look a little bit deeper, then we realize the Chinese answer to the new America, the new American policies vis-a-vis China, and perhaps also the new policies coming from the EU towards China, are not a populist retreat from the global system, but rather the invention of something which you may call a populist multilateralism. And that is actually what the idea I would like to introduce today. I called that the Chinese hub and spoke multilateralism and the notion of populist economic policy. Oops. Well, here we go. Well, let's simply start with what is happening here. Wait a sec. Okay. The starting point is just Western qualitative multilateralism. And following Cafarena, I would simply highlight three key features. It's based on shared principles. Okay, so members of such a multilateralist group are sharing principles, rules, a common understanding of how the world should be. So it's normative. We have a perceived indivisibility of the group, insofar as they are understanding that the challenge, the reason why they are united, is a joint public good which is being created, be it climate change, be it peace, whatever. And third point, or the third feature, is that we have something like called diffuse reciprocity. That means the gains achieved out of this multilateral endeavor cannot be individualized and allocated on an individual basis, but it's a diffuse payoff where in the long run everybody is profiting, and in the long run everybody will reach higher levels of utility, and that's fine, okay? And this diffuse payoff is accepted for the higher goal. Of course, this kind of thing can only work on the basis of trust in shared joint interests, and the trust that these joint goals can be achieved and will be achieved in the longer run. So that implies that we have partners which are united by a strong set of shared values, and this set of shared values is expected to become even stronger in the run of their cooperation in this group, in this multilateral setting. So this is the Western understanding, or the Western understanding of qualitative multilateralism. This is our notion in the Western world how it should be done. But China has devised something different. They've devised something which they call true multilateralism. I mean, the word per se is already a message. So it's true multilateralism. And that is quite different. It's got a very fundamental understanding insofar as that there is no other shared value basis but the UN Charter. So it does not go beyond the standards which have been defined in the Westphalian treaties. Yeah, it's very, very fundamental. We have sovereign equality and self-determination, non-interference in the state's domestic affairs, and disputes must be settled peacefully. Nothing about shared values, simply the understanding that in your own fiefdom, you're king. Yeah, that's where you can do whatever you like, and nobody is allowed to interfere from the outside and bring in any super imposed values or norms. That implies global affairs should be managed by dialogue on equal footing, consensus building through consultation. We see this right now very nicely in the Chinese peace approach for the Russia-Ukrainian war, which actually asks Ukraine and Russia to come to a table and start discussions without any preconditions. And then comes the third point, where China is simply saying that all subgroups or multilateral initiatives, which are based on a broader set of values beyond the UN Charter, should be understood as fake or pseudo multilateralist, because they're already implementing a normative setting. And that is understood as being directed by elitists groups in the global system. I mean, the Chinese narrative is right now the United States, which are trying to superimpose their normative setting, their ideas, their power on other players. So we have here a Chinese version of multilateralism, which requires only a very minimal consensus on shared norms. And otherwise, we have a very, very strong concept of independent sovereign states. if you look at recent initiatives by China to establish multilateral alliances, you find exactly this pattern. Here, just three major initiatives by China in recent years. You have the Global Development Initiative, and it's got all very lofty goals. All that sounds very, very nice, but you see, it's very broad, and it does not really require shared values. The Global Civilization Initiative has just been started a week ago. Yeah, so we have a Global Development Initiative, which actually is something like the follow-up to the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative in a new global setting is a Global Development Initiative. You have a Global Security Initiative, which is also an answer to recent developments in Russia and in Europe. And then the Global Civilization Initiative, which is designed to provide China with additional leverage in the global system and say and influence in this system. Let me now try to look at what the reality of all these Chinese initiatives is. I call it hub and spoke bilateral or multilateral approach, because if you look at China's most recent multilateral initiatives, then you see not really a multilateral level playing field where we have a lot of independent players which are symmetric in their power and in their rights in this group, but you see rather an asymmetric system where you have China in the center as the most powerful, most influential player, and then you've got a periphery of secondary powers, secondary states, which are connected in this system by a hub and spoke system to the central China. So you have China with a central role. You have hardly any horizontal institution building amongst the whole group of these independent or equal partners. And the whole system is, as I said, constructed as a hub and spoke system where China is first of all upholding bilateral relationships with other players. So take the Belt and Road Initiative. You have 145 members or 145 actors which have signed MOUs or contractual arrangements with China. It's all contractual arrangements with China. It's not contractual arrangements with a multilateral group or any organization. There's also no real horizontal platform for 145 players, but it's really a setup of bilateral relations. The same for the by now more or less non-existent 16 or 17 plus 1 group between China and a group of Eastern European countries. They are all based on the idea of China playing an asymmetric role, where China is making use of superior power to assert its particular interest and is distributing goodies. No question about that. So these are groups where members are profiting. China is distributing goodies, no question about that, by means of its, got a problem with the technology today, sorry about that. By means of its economic and technological leadership, its financial power, which has been quite a lure in recent years, especially for the Belt and Road member countries, etc., etc. But at the same time, this has allowed China to leverage its own economic power to establish something like a standardization process, a promulgation of Chinese norms, standards, technological standards especially, and the creation of a new sphere of interest and of a little bit more Chinese institutions than in the rest of the global system. So the question is, if this Chinese style of true multilateralism, as they call it, is not eventually creating exactly the same type of subgroups and blocks that China is condemning the West to create by its own multilateralist approach. Okay. I leave this. I'm not going to answer that, but I'm just leaving this for discussion. Now, trying to connect this whole thing with the notion of populism. Let's simply start with China's true multilateralism and domestic populism. How is it sold to the domestic populace? Well, China is presenting itself in its own propaganda at home as an heroic knight, which is fighting against the almighty evil power, which is, of course, the United States. And of course, that has a very nice side effect that anything which does not work out, any negative development, missed goals, etc., may be attributed to this overwhelming external power against which China is fighting. Yeah? So it strengthens Chinese identity building. At the same time, this concept is putting China on the moral high ground. It strengthens, it's used, it's employed to strengthen the people's belief in China's supremacy. 5,000 years of uninterrupted cultural achievements, once again paying into the idea of Chinese identity building. Of course, it does pave the way for the promotion of Chinese business and economic interests, at least in some parts of the international arena, and is thereby strengthening the domestic economy and material basis of the people, at least in principle. And what we should not forget, most of these initiatives, like the Belt and Road Initiative, like the Global Development Initiative, etc., may be understood as international extensions of the CCP's, the Communist Party's core populist and national programs, which have been set up in the domestic context. So if we talk about the China Dream, Xi Jinping thought, etc., etc., these are deeply populist nationalist programs, and their international dimension is being created by these true multilateral approaches or innovations China is introducing to the global system. And then finally, the notion of China's true multilateralism and populism on a global scale. My idea here is that we have here a constellation where China is communicating its true multilateralism as a concept of the global South, which is providing an alternative to the elitist Western multilateralism. And the latter is, of course, set to establish elite clubs. It's erecting protectionist barriers against the globe's underdogs, is reintroducing bloc building, Cold War rhetoric, is not taking care of the real needs, of the real requirements of the poor people of the world, etc., etc. So if you look at what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years with the reinvigoration, revitalization of the BRICS concept, I think that pays in nicely to this argument, where China is trying to promote this idea that we need, that the world, the poor people of the world need global alliances, multilateral settings, which can start without this strong set of values, of norms and standards, but start at the very beginning and provide a forum for these underdogs to deal and fight with these elitist powers, which are keeping them down and stop their economic and social development. I mean, this is the other major narrative China is promulgating right now, that the United States is trying to stop its economic rise and is stopping the Chinese people from trying to stop the Chinese people from achieving the welfare and power status they deserve.
5 minutes.
1 minute. This is part of this is a quote of Xi Jinping at the Bao'an Forum, a major economic policy meeting in southern China, with stating very clearly a lot of unrest, division, and poverty have been created in different parts of the world under practices of prioritizing one country's interests, making coteries that uphold hegemony, and treating international rules as a tool for the interests of one nation, using a certain country's interests as the criteria, and engaging in selective multilateralism. I mean, this is clearly directed against the United States, and is opening the doors for true multilateralism, where the global underdogs, the developing world, is asked to join China and stand up against the global elite, which is located in Washington and in the European capitals. So China presents itself as a noble fighter for those who are out of favor of the all-powerful elite, and asserts their claim to an equal voice in all global affairs. So that's my idea, which I wanted to introduce to you here today. Thank you very much for listening.